Rick.
Micah, how you doing?
Good.
Good. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Yeah, welcome back.
We made it to episode 2.
I know. I'm so excited.
I'm a little surprised, but, happy to be here. This is an audio format, so we can't really convey just how much better our situation is than our first episode. We're in a pretty professional-looking studio on Creighton's campus rather than the basement of a leaky building.
We've actually got a studio now in Hyder, so it's very nice. So
yeah. Okay. So for episode 2, I'm going to start with a question for you.
Okay.
I know you have these trivial things in your life like family and career and other passions, but are you a horror movie fan?
A little bit. Not over the top, but a little bit. Yes.
What's your favorite?
Chucky, I would say. Is that a horror movie? Would you consider that a horror movie?
It is. That was what I was expecting from you. But I like that.
It's like horror and funny all at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think that would be,
that's a good one. Like, that was the one that scared me the most when I was a kid, actually. I could watch a lot of stuff, but for some reason the doll, probably because I had toys that looked like it.
It is scary and funny at the same time.
All right. So
what do you got?
Well, the segue is, have you seen The Exorcist? Of course, right?
I have not seen The Exorcist. No. That kind of stuff freaks me out a little bit, so I have stayed away from that one. But I'd like to.
This episode's going to be.
It's going down in flames.
It's going to be kind of weird for you then. This will be an interesting episode, Rick.
Well, I'm interested to hear about it. So.
All right.
And the connection to Creighton.
There is a connection to Creighton here.
Okay.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the movie The Exorcist, which came out in 1973.
Yes.
Did you know, I'm going to tell you a few things. Did you know it's the 9th highest grossing movie of all time, adjusted for inflation?
Is that right? Yeah. No, I did not realize
Adjusted for inflation, it's made like $1.8 billion.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's the top horror movie of all time. It's the highest grossing R-rated movie of all time. It's also the first horror movie to be nominated for Best Picture.
Wow.
Its script, adapted by William Peter Blatty from his own best-selling novel, won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay. The Exorcist is, by many accounts, the best horror movie of all time. It's inarguably one of the most culturally influential. All right, so the reason...
Not Chucky.
Not Chucky. Maybe the most influential of your life. So the reason I'm talking about The Exorcist is, as you might have guessed, it has a Creighton connection.
Okay.
You didn't know that.
I did know a little bit about this, but I'm interested in hearing more.
Okay. Before we get into this, tell them who you are.
I'm Rick Davis, and I'm with University Communications and Marketing, and I've been at Creighton for 28 years, or is it better to say nearly 3 decades? What sounds more impressive?
Both sound like a long time.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's the right word. And I'm Micah. I don't really know what I do here. I do work at Creighton, though, and this is Weird Creighton History, episode 2. In each episode of Weird Creighton History, I will be telling you, Rick, a story about or related to the history of Creighton University. Rick will never know the topic beforehand. In some cases, the history will be something Rick is familiar with and has perhaps even lived through. In others, it will be something he's never even heard of. In every episode, Rick is encouraged to interrupt me as often as he likes within reason.
Okay, you got it. So Exorcist, how many times have you seen it?
I've probably only seen it 2 or 3 times.
Okay.
It's not a super fun rewatch.
Yeah.
Even for Halloween, you want to watch things like Halloween, the John Carpenter movie with Mike Myers. Like,
sure.
That's fun to rewatch. Exorcist is not a fun film.
Okay. Yeah, I would imagine. So I'm interested now. You got me piqued. What is this Creighton connection?
Okay. So, Rick, did you know that the hit novel and film The Exorcist was based on a real-life St. Louis exorcism of a 13-year-old boy?
I did hear that, yes.
Okay, not the 12-year-old girl like the book and the movie.
Correct, yep.
Did you know that of the Jesuits leading that real-life exorcism, one was the brother of a Creighton University president, one later became a Creighton professor, and the third would later work in Creighton's alumni relations division.
Wow. Okay. Yeah,
we have a little bit of a connection there.
Absolutely.
So you'd never heard like any rumors or anything about this?
I had heard some rumors about it, and actually one of my former bosses in our department, I think, actually got to interview the Jesuit priest and he wasn't allowed to talk about it. So
okay.
I never got it. I tried to pry some information from him, but I never got the full story other than that he had interviewed this person.
Oh, that's good.
So,
well, everybody involved in the story, including the 3 Jesuits, are dead. So I feel like,
we can tell it. That's great.
So before I tell this story, I just need to say to the listeners up front, I know this is a sensitive topic. I have no intention of saying whether this particular exorcism case was a result of a demon or mental illness or a prank being pulled by the boy. Even the people who were there didn't agree on exactly what happened. I can say beforehand that the Jesuits, family members, and everyone involved appeared to have acted responsibly and followed the Catholic Church's exorcism ritual to the letter. So I'm not saying this happened or that happened. I'm just, or telling anyone what to believe.
Sure.
I'm just going to report what's been reported, say what people believe to have happened.
And this is something that Jesuits took seriously.
Yeah.
So,
they were. And I mean, the Catholic Church too, I'll get into it a little bit, but there's a pretty rigid procedure for exorcisms that was relatively recently updated.
Okay.
So I learned a lot about.
I bet you did.
I learned a lot about exorcism through this. That's why I read so much about it. I just was really interested about how this has evolved. Okay. So our first Creighton-connected Jesuit in the story is Father Raymond Bishop, S.J.
Okay.
You wouldn't have known him. You wouldn't have overlapped him.
Okay.
He's older. He was a professor in Creighton's education department for more than 20 years, from the mid-50s to the late 70s.
Okay.
But when we start our story, Father Bishop, this was a few years before he came to Creighton. This was the spring of 1949. Father Bishop was a professor at St. Louis University. One day he was approached by one of his students. She told him that her 13-year-old cousin, referred to by the church with the identity-protecting aliases Roland Doe or Robbie Mannheim, was being tormented by violent supernatural attacks. The attacks had begun, she said, after Robbie's beloved aunt had died. His aunt Tilly had been a spiritualist and taught Robbie how to use a Ouija board. Do you say Ouija or Ouija?
I would say Ouija.
Ouija? Okay.
Yeah.
I've always said Ouija, but I don't know. Let's say Ouija.
Okay, Ouija. Okay,
Ouija.
got it.
She had taught Robbie how to use a Ouija board. The family believed the trouble had started when Robbie used the board in an attempt to contact his Aunt Tilly in the afterlife. I was going to say you might remember Reagan uses a Ouija board in The Exorcist.
Okay.
She uses a Ouija board.
I can envision this.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
That's where the trouble starts in The Exorcist too.
Okay.
By this point, Robbie's family had already consulted physicians, psychiatrists, and their own Lutheran minister. The family was Lutheran, not Catholic.
Okay.
They'd taken Robbie to get psychological physical testing at the Georgetown University Hospital. No ailments were revealed or diagnoses made. The family grew increasingly desperate. This is also in The Exorcist a thing that happens. They go through all of the tests to try to figure out what's wrong with the girl before they go to the church.
Right.
So the strange episodes, Robbie's cousin told Father Bishop, had started a few months prior. Back in the boy's Maryland home, Robbie and his family had reportedly experienced scratching sounds in the walls and beneath the floorboards, heavy furniture moving on its own, objects flying across the room, and a crucifix on the wall that shook anytime Robbie was near. One night, Robbie reportedly went into a trance-like state, and the word Lewis appeared within a red rash on his ribs. Robbie's mother took this as a sign that they needed to take a trip to St. Louis and stay with extended family.
Is that right?
Yeah, so that's why they were in St. Louis to begin.
But it didn't say St. Louis. It just said Louis.
It said Louis. It said a few other things too. It said hell. It said a few other things as well. And this was I'll get into like how we know that this supposedly happened.
Okay.
But this was one of the things where the Jesuit priest, the family said they swore they didn't see his hands anywhere near him. You know, he could have been carving this into himself. But
so they were in Maryland at the time. Now they're moving to St. Louis. Have they contacted the Creighton Jesuit, or not the Creighton Jesuit yet, but the Jesuit yet?
No.
Okay.
It was, and I don't think that was ever necessarily their intention. It was his cousin going to Raymond Bishop at SLU that kind of started the whole thing.
Got it.
They had worked with their Lutheran minister a little bit, but they didn't really have an exorcism procedure. There was some talk that there was another exorcism attempted in Maryland, but people who have researched this disagree on whether or not that was true.
Okay.
So they were in St. Louis. This is the spring of 49.
Okay.
And the cousin had enlisted the help of Father Bishop. Father Bishop, he was a Jesuit teacher at SLU. He didn't know. I mean, most priests don't have any experience.
Right. Yeah, you said he was in the education department, right?
He was in the education department, yeah. He had no experience with this kind of thing. Hauntings, possessions, supernatural phenomena, nothing like that.
Okay.
But he didn't want to turn away a family in need. He sought advice from St. Louis University President Paul Reinhardt, S.J., whose own brother, Carl Reinhardt, S.J., would become Creighton University president the following year.
Absolutely. Well-known Creighton Jesuit. Yep.
Yeah, there's another Creighton connection. Father Paul Reinhardt, president of SLU, encouraged Father Bishop to bless the suburban St. Louis home where Robbie was staying.
Okay.
When Father Bishop arrived to meet Robbie, the boy's bed started shaking, but it stopped when Bishop sprinkled holy water and made the sign of the cross at Robbie. Bishop noted that Robbie's body was covered in scratches.
Wow.
Father Bishop believed the boy was possessed by a demon and required an exorcism. He went back to SLU and asked for the assistance of his friend, Father William Bodern. Does the last name Bodern ring a bell?
Doesn't sound familiar to me.
I think I'm pronouncing it right. It's Bowdern.
Okay.
I think Bodern could be Bowdern. So listeners, please correct me and make fun of me if I got that wrong.
And now what's his position?
Let's see. He is the pastor of SLU's St. Francis Xavier College Church.
Okay.
He was 52 at the time in 1949.
Okay.
He was also the brother of Thomas Bodern, S.J., who had been president of Creighton University for a few years, the last few years of World War II.
Okay. I didn't realize that name. Yeah.
And he was an interesting guy in himself. There's probably an episode on him at some point too.
Okay.
But yeah, so another brother.
So we have two that have brothers with relations to Creighton.
Yeah. And so I can say up front, Bodern never had, he never came to Creighton as far as I know. And his connection was a few years prior, his brother was president of Creighton. But so Bishop later came to Creighton, Bodern, brother.
Yep. So now we've got three Jesuits involved, the one from the education department, the president, and now involved with the church.
Yeah. Now they got the church involved.
Okay.
Father William Bodern himself had served overseas as a chaplain during World War II and had witnessed quite a few horrors. But like Bishop, he had no experience with exorcism. Fortunately, the church does have a very specific procedure for this. It's called the rite of exorcism. Have you heard of this?
I have heard of it, but I haven't researched very much into it. So
I've only know this because I've seen a lot of exorcism movies. I never really knew if it was real or not until research I get. But
okay.
Yeah, it comes up a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Catholic Church are always the heroes in these movies, and they have this. So the rite of exorcism, it was revised relatively recently in 1999.
Okay.
It was one of the last reforms post-Vatican II, actually. The new guidelines for exorcism were that the person who claims to be possessed must be evaluated by doctors to rule out a mental or physical illness.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Most reported cases do not require an exorcism because modern Catholic officials regard genuine demonic possession as an extremely rare phenomenon that is easily confounded with natural mental disturbances.
Sure. Yeah. Yep.
But back in 1949, the church was still using the rite first established in 1614. So
wow. Okay. So it hadn't been updated.
It was a long time coming.
Okay.
I don't necessarily think there was anything inherently barbaric about the rite or anything before that. Bishop and Bodern studied up on the rite, and they were granted permission from the St. Louis Archbishop to perform a formal exorcism on Robbie Mannheim.
Okay.
Bodern agreed to take the lead. So real quick, some people might be wondering, how do we know all this? This is a lot of detail for what is a pretty weird event.
So how did you dig up all this information?
I mostly just look, again, through the Creighton archive. You find something, pull on a thread, it goes to the next thing, goes to the next thing. And you're like, oh, we have a connection to the Exorcist.
Wow.
It was just like, and it's not, we don't have a lot in our records about it, but obviously this is a really fascinating case to a lot of people. So there's a lot of documentation on it, most of it conflicting and contradictory.
Yeah, I bet. Okay.
The primary source for this, though, it's a 29-page diary that Bishop, the later education professor at Creighton, kept on the exorcism.
Okay.
It's a diary that would later become integral to William Peter Blatty's writing of the Exorcist novel and the subsequent Oscar-winning movie.
Sure.
The best book on this case is one I read called Possessed, The True Story of an Exorcism by Thomas B. Allen.
And that's on this particular case or just?
Yeah, it's entirely on this case.
Okay.
And he went off the diary and some eyewitness testimony, basically.
Okay.
It was so thorough. Incredible how much. And I think some of the stuff it was later shown that he got a few things wrong, but for the most part, it was an accurate representation of at least how people described what happened.
Right.
So it's a very good book. There were more than 40 witnesses to Robbie's exorcism over the course of the multiple sessions. I don't know if that's what you call them. And obviously some people talked.
Yes.
They talked to friends, family, neighbors, the press. The true story had been told and retold so many times that accounts have inevitably become confusing and contradictory. For instance, there might have been an additional exorcism performed in Maryland where Robbie slashed the wrist of a different priest, but the people who study this case don't agree on the matter. The fact that Robbie's exorcism became urban legend that's been filtered through countless iterations of media sensationalism, that hasn't really helped matters much.
Yeah.
Just so far, we've got Fathers Bishop and Bodern, and now we meet our third, mostly Creighton-connected Jesuit.
Okay.
Father Walter Halloran, S.J.
Yeah, that name sounds familiar.
Okay. In the 1980s, Father Halloran would join Creighton University to help run the Alumni Relations Division, which is a division I work with in the same. They're technically a department I work with in university relations. So.
Yep, that's the name. That sounds familiar.
Yeah. So in 1949, Father Halloran was still a Jesuit scholastic studying at St. Louis University.
So Jesuit scholastic, that's still a younger Jesuit.
Yeah, he's not ordained yet.
Okay.
He's still Mr. Halloran.
Right.
But he's Mr. Halloran S.J., I think, how that works. I could be wrong. But
not a priest.
Not a priest yet.
Okay.
So he's there, and he's just studying history at SLU as a scholastic, in the same way Creighton has scholastic sometimes too. They're studying, but sometimes they're also working.
Now, how was he pulled in?
So this is funny.
Okay.
He was definitely pulled in. It was random. He was the driver for Father Bodern.
The driver, okay.
One night in March of 1949, Bodern asked Halloran to drive him and Father Bishop to a house in the suburbs.
And he didn't know. He didn't know what was coming.
He had no idea what he was doing. This was just one of the things. I don't know if it works this way here, but the younger Jesuits, they helped the older Jesuits.
Sure.
They drove them places. They were the ones that get groceries.
Right. Yeah.
They pulled up to the home.
Okay.
It was late at night. Maybe anticipating that it needed to be a horror movie someday, all of the exorcisms of Robbie were performed in the middle of the night.
Is that right?
There were no daytime.
Is that true?
Yeah. They performed 20 to 30 exorcisms of Robbie. Over a month. Sorry, I'm getting ahead.
I don't know if I would want to be involved in an exorcism, and definitely not one at night.
Not one at night. Well, and there were other good reasons the Jesuits were not. So they pull up to the house. Bodern and Bishop are in the car. Halloran's just the driver. He doesn't know where they've even just arrived.
Okay.
And they pull up, and Bodern leans over the front seat and says, "Come in with us, Walt. I'll be doing an exorcism. We might need your help."
That was the introduction to what he needed to do.
That was it. He didn't. Yeah, he had no pre-warning for that.
Wow.
But he was about to go into a house where he was going to help conduct an exorcism.
So how did he react to that? Does it say?
According to the sources I read, he was pretty surprised.
Okay.
But he didn't ask questions. He's along for the ride.
Okay.
He followed Bishop and Bodern into the house, and they began the first of 20 to 30 exorcisms that would take place over the next several weeks. So they would take place at this house. They would take place on St. Louis University's campus. Although I've read different things about which halls, or the rectory, was it in this hall?
Right. 20 to 30 over what time frame?
It was a little over a month.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was.
That's a lot.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
Especially overnight, because they were like all night affairs.
Okay.
And there'd be. I'm talking about these three Jesuits. There were a lot of Jesuits involved. There were a lot. His family was in the room often. I mean, there were sometimes 10. Probably 15 people in these rooms.
Okay.
When this was going on. And then the last place some of the exorcism took place was the Alexian Brothers Hospital. And Robbie was cared for there by physicians and family members throughout. Bishop's diaries of the ordeal was really long and very detailed. There's a full transcript of it actually transcribed online. So I'll be linking to that in the show notes.
Oh, that'll be great. Yeah. Did you read that whole transcript?
Yeah. It's fairly short. It's 29 pages, but it was some of what he witnessed, but also it was a lot of what he heard. So family, so he gave a narrative of what happened in Maryland too, based on family members. So here's an excerpt from the diary.
Got it.
March 18th, 1949. The prayers of the exorcism were continued, and Robbie was seized violently, so he began to struggle with his pillow and the bed clothing. The contortions revealed physical strength beyond natural power. Robbie spit at the faces of those who prayed over him. He spit at the relics at the priest's hands. He writhed under the sprinkling of holy water. He fought and screamed in a diabolical, high-pitched voice. And
wow.
Yeah. The diary is all like this. It's very detailed.
Okay.
One night, the word hell supposedly manifested on the boy's chest. Witnesses claim his hand had been nowhere near the word. Another night, Robbie punched Halloran in the face and broke his nose.
Wow.
Yeah. The exorcisms would always begin in the evening and last well into the night. Well into the next morning. After each endless night, Robbie would return to normal, as though coming out of a trance. He told the priest he had no memory of the exorcisms themselves. He would then typically sleep most of the rest of the day, while the Jesuits went back to their teaching, studies, or parish work. The Archbishop and sloop president had instructed the Jesuits to be discreet in the matter. They were told to keep up appearances that nothing out of the ordinary was happening. As this went on for more than a month, obviously the men were exhausted.
I bet.
There were other Jesuits who assisted throughout the ordeal, but Bodern and Bishop were really the only constants throughout. There was details. So Halloran, as the youngest guy who lived the longest, he gave interviews about this later on, and he would describe it. He had to just stay up all night and help with these exorcisms, and then he'd go back to class, in the case of Bodern or Bishop, they went back to the parish, or they went back to teaching class. So,
and they were asked not to talk about it.
They were asked not to talk about it.
Not to sensationalize it, probably,
yeah,
huh?
No, absolutely. Well, and also just the rumors getting started, and it would make some people uncomfortable.
Right.
So they kept mum about it during that time.
Okay.
One side note I just found amusing about this. During this ordeal, the family had also called in Frank Bubb.
Okay.
He was a scientist and mathematician at Washington University in St. Louis. Dr. Bubb had been a key figure in making the first atomic bomb for the Manhattan Project a few years prior. And he was fascinated by the paranormal, and he reportedly thought that the objects moving around Robbie could be explained by electromagnetism. He didn't think it was a demon. He thought it was...
Oh, is that right?
Psychic abilities. This is a guy who helped build the...
Yeah, that's interesting.
According to a later interview with Father Halloran, Dr. Bubb came to the house where Robbie was staying to test his theory. He saw furniture moving around on its own. He jotted down some notes quickly and said, "This isn't my territory," before rushing.
And then rushed out of the house. Is that what it said?
Yeah. He just according to the witness accounts, he just skedaddled. Said, "No thanks," which I just think is like a scene out of a movie.
Yeah, that's right. See you later.
Sorry, side note. Now we get back to the story. Flash forward to the evening of April 18th, 1949. We're a little over a month in from when this all started, when the cousin came to Father Bishop and said, "Please help my cousin."
Sure.
The Jesuits had been performing exorcisms on Robbie for more than a month. This would end up being the last exorcism on April 18th.
Okay.
Bishop's diary reports that during the final night, Robbie started speaking in a different male voice, which said, "Satan, Satan, I am Saint Michael. I command you, Satan, and other evil spirits to leave the body in the name of Dominus, immediately. Now.
So that was Father saying that to the boy?
No, I'm sorry. That was the boy. The boy said it, and they claimed in a different male voice, and he was speaking as Saint Michael.
Really?
Casting the demons through.
Okay.
Then Robbie woke up, and he told the Jesuits he's gone. Robbie described a dream he had in which Saint Michael and the Archangel fought Satan and his demons to free him from their grip.
Fascinating.
That was the end of the exorcism, not the end of the story, but the end of the exorcisms. The St. Louis Archdiocese was issued a formal report on the incident. Copies of Bishop's diary were filed away. The case was closed, and Robbie's identity continued to be kept secret. The Jesuits were told to never speak of the exorcism publicly. Most of them followed those instructions.
Sure, yeah.
All right, so before I continue, what questions do you have about this?
So after that final episode, was the boy better? I mean, what happened to him? That's
sort of the ending of the story.
Okay.
Before we get to it. But I can say he went back to normal.
Is that right?
There was apparently nothing else going on. After that, from the reports they had, he went on to live a relatively normal life.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was the Jesuits' take on it? Did all three agree that the boy was possessed by demons?
No.
Okay.
They had differing opinions. I would say, too, especially, Bodern was a true believer. Bodern believed 100% that this boy had been possessed by a demon. Father Halloran didn't say he wasn't, but he said he wasn't sure.
Okay.
He claimed that he didn't see anything that couldn't be explained, except for he thought he saw a vial of holy water fly across the room without anybody throwing it.
Okay.
But he was not convinced.
Was not convinced.
Yeah. I mean, he was interviewed so many times by so many different sources over the years, and he seemed to be unsure about it. He didn't want to say definitively either way.
And how about the third Jesuit?
Bishop, I think, believed it. He wasn't as public about his thoughts, but I would have to think, since he wrote that diary, I think he believed that the boy was demonically possessed. Did
the Jesuits write how it changed or influenced them?
Yes, to some degree. I mean, during the exorcism, there were reports. I don't know if this is true, but supposedly Father William Bodern was fasting during the exorcism as part of the ritual. So he was emaciated. They weren't sleeping. They weren't doing super well. I don't think that after the fact, any of them were that affected by it. They went on to continue working with the church. To the best of my knowledge, none of them performed exorcisms after this.
Okay, that was the last one.
It was a one-time deal.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So yeah, they didn't do that. Just jumping back into it a little bit. This is kind of an epilogue.
Okay.
Also, I think has some of the more interesting parts of this.
Great.
People talked about this exorcism, obviously.
Sure.
It wasn't just those three men. There were a lot of other people involved, family members. Some of the students and faculty and staff had known about it at SLU, family members. So people are talking.
Right.
The national media caught wind of the story pretty quickly, actually.
Okay.
It was in August of 1949, and it came because the Lutheran minister who first helped Robbie's family spoke of the incident at a parapsychology conference, which I just like, why is a Lutheran minister at a parapsychology conference? But 1949.
Sure. That's a little strange.
Different world. But in August of that year, the story made its way to the front page of the Washington Post, partly because the family lived in the D.C. area. They had just been visiting St. Louis.
Yep. Now it's going to take off.
The headline read, "Priest Frees Boy Reported Held in Devil's Grip."
Wow.
So just a short little article, but it was on the front page.
Okay.
In addition to media coverage, the story of Robbie's exorcism continued to work its way into the local lore of both St. Louis and the D.C. area. Around this time, Exorcist novelist and screenwriter William Peter Blatty learned of the tale. It was in the spring of 1950 while he was attending Georgetown.
Okay.
His source was a professor named Eugene Gallagher, S.J., who told him about the case and the existence of Bishop's diary. Slightly older alumni who are hearing this story may know of a Eugene Gallagher Jesuit who used to work at Creighton.
Yeah.
Ironically, Father Raymond Bishop, who participated in the actual exorcism, would later teach alongside a different Jesuit professor named Eugene Gallagher while at Creighton. Creighton's Father Gallagher was a beloved professor of education known for feeding, caring for, and even training a group of campus squirrels.
Oh,
I have a whole thing about that. He trained them to like eat out of his hand and come into his office and do tricks.
And we do have plenty of squirrels on campus, that's for sure.
Campus. Yeah. There's it's we should put that in our marketing more. So
yeah, absolutely.
Good recruitment tool.
Yeah.
But so not the same Eugene Gallagher for anybody who knew of him. Years after graduating from Georgetown, Blatty was a successful writer, mostly of comedies like the Pink Panther movie.
Is that right?
Dark. Yeah, he's a comedy writer.
Wow.
But he remembered this story, and he thought that he could tell this story and turn it into a novel.
Sure.
A really compelling novel. He couldn't get it out of his head. While he was doing research for the book, Blatty contacted the exorcist himself, Father Bodern. Bodern told Blatty he couldn't reveal the details because of the promise he had made to the Archbishop, but he did reportedly tell Blatty, "I can assure you of one thing. The case in which I was involved was the real thing. I had no doubt about it then, and I have no doubt about it now."
So there's the question. Yeah, he was convinced.
Yeah, Bodern seems never doubted for a second that what they had initially believed was happening was happening.
Okay.
On Bodern's request, Blatty changed the child in his book from a boy to a girl and moved the location entirely to the D.C. area to protect Robbie's identity. But Robbie, of course, wasn't his real name. Mannheim wasn't the real name.
Right.
It was anonymous. Published in 1971, The Exorcist stayed on the bestseller list for 54 weeks and led to the 1973 hit movie of the same name. For the film's shoot, a Georgetown Jesuit professor who had taught Blatty served as a technical advisor on set. Many accidents happened during the production. This is kind of, for people like horror movies, this is kind of a notorious thing. There's a few horror movies like this, Poltergeist, some others, where it's just, there's some spooky.
There's creepy stuff happening on set, huh?
Happens on a movie about demonic possession. So people got,
Right.
So many accidents were happening, including there were some fires on set that were unexplained.
Is that right?
So many that the film's director, William Friedkin, asked the Jesuit technical advisor to bless the set. There were no further accidents.
Is that right? Thank you to our Jesuits from Georgetown, huh?
Yeah. So it's good to have a Jesuit around.
Yeah.
Upon its theatrical release in 1973, it came out the day after Christmas, actually, which I always think is such an interesting release date for that.
The Exorcist came out the day after Christmas.
December 26th.
Is that right? Okay.
Movies were, everything was so strange.
That's interesting.
The Exorcist was instantly notorious, which meant people couldn't stay away from it. So it was a huge hit. Audiences lined up for blocks, waiting for hours to see the movie. As a ticket-selling gimmick that might have had some truth to it, the film's marketing team got the media to report on audience members passing out from fright while watching the movie. At many theaters showing The Exorcist, there would be nurses, physicians, and ambulances on standby.
Wow.
There's old news coverage of it, too. It was obviously somewhat of a marketing gimmick.
Sure.
But I think it actually was happening. And I can say for somebody who saw it when I was in high school in the OOs, it's still, I saw it in the theater. They had a re-release for it. It was still just a deeply upsetting experience.
Right. That's why I don't like a lot of those movies, or watch a lot of those movies. It stays in your head, and sometimes you can't get it out. And it's
insane to me that it's one of the top 10 highest grossing movies of all time, because it's also one of the most just obscene movies.
Right. And disturbing.
Because they truly do want to portray evil. They want you to see this it's as pure evil. So they go, the original movie was very close to being X-rated. It's a very, just on every level, I think it's still one of the most upsetting movies I've ever seen.
Is that right?
Yeah. There's parts of it that are a little cheesy now, but it's.
When was the last time you saw it as an adult?
Yeah, I watched it maybe last Halloween.
Okay.
Yeah. And it had been maybe 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So, it's just, they were telling people they were going to, and they've done stuff like that. They did things like that with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho.
Sure.
You're going to die if you see this movie, and then everybody goes to see it.
Right. Yeah.
Good marketing pitch.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. We should do that with Weird Creighton History.
Yeah, that's right.
You're going to die if you listen to this podcast. As I had mentioned earlier, The Exorcist was the first horror movie nominated for Best Picture, one of the highest grossing movies of all time, et cetera, et cetera. It didn't just inspire the next 50 years of horror movies. It would also set the mold for the modern cultural conception of exorcism itself. There weren't many movies about exorcism or books about exorcism before Blatty's book and movie.
Right.
For most of the American audience, you don't know. You maybe know a little bit about it, but this is what people still have in their minds because all of the movies ripped it off. So if you ever think of exorcism, you think of this movie.
Right.
It's
yes.
a big deal.
And I didn't see the movie, but I remember the little girl floating above the bed.
Yeah.
That's the iconic image from the movie.
There's some stuff in so obviously it's sensationalized and inflated to be scarier than the real exorcism was. But some of it was actually based on reported things that happened with both this exorcism and some different exorcisms. Okay,
so kind of just a compilation of what he'd heard.
Blatty chose this one in part because he heard about it at Georgetown, but also because of Bishop's diary. It was one of the most well-documented of any of the exorcism cases, at least in America.
Sure.
Any of the modern ones. There was one actually, probably the second most documented one, or maybe even more so, there's one that was Erling, Iowa, which I think is only about an hour away from here.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm forgetting exactly all the specifics of that one, but that he took some of the details of that as well.
Okay.
So all of this movie, our modern conception of exorcism, the cultural and probably even spiritual influence that the sensation of the movie had on some people, it all starts with this exorcism that these 3 guys performed.
And 3 Creighton, or not 3 Creighton Jesuits, but 3 Jesuits, with Creighton connections.
All with Creighton connections. So here's what happened to all the key people involved. Here's like the true epilogue.
Okay, here's what
you were asking how they were affected.
Correct.
Father William Bodern went back to work as pastor of the Xavier College Church at St. Louis University. He remained there for some time, never performed another exorcism. He never spoke to reporters about the case. He spoke to Blatty a little bit, but I don't think he told him much.
Okay.
According to his nephew, he wouldn't even talk with his own family members about the exorcism. He stayed tight-lipped and he listened to what the Archbishop asked him to do. He died in 1983 at the age of 86.
Wow.
Father Raymond Bishop. Shortly after the exorcism, Bishop started at Creighton University, where he worked as a professor of education for the next 20 years. He died in 1978 at the age of 72. His diary made the Robbie Mannheim exorcism one of the most extensively documented cases in modern times, and undoubtedly the most publicized.
You know what, Micah? I'd like to hear from listeners, whoever we have out there, if they had him as a professor.
Absolutely.
Did he ever talk about this in his class, in the classroom? You know, did he give little snippets of what happened, or was he, did he not talk about it?
Bishop's there wasn't as much from him. I mean, the diary he kept, obviously, but he didn't seem to offer much. I looked through the old Creightonians because I thought, if anything, there could be a Creightonian article about it around the time The Exorcist came out. There was nothing about it. There were a lot of articles about him for other reasons, but never that. But yeah, I'd be curious as well. It is, he's a little bit of a blank in this outside of the diary.
Okay.
Yeah. So Father Walter Halloran, who probably students wouldn't have as much interaction with him probably since he was alumni relations, but some people at Creighton still may have known him.
Yep.
You overlapped with him a little, right?
Yeah. What was the years again?
He came in 87, 88.
Yeah. Yep. That was when I was graduating. Yeah.
Graduating. Okay.
Yep.
And you just went right to Creighton, right?
Yes.
Yeah. You never left.
No, I did leave. I did work in newspapers for a while, then came back.
That's right.
Graduated, worked outside for a little bit, and then came back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just couldn't leave it.
I couldn't leave it.
It's like the mafia.
That's right.
So Father Walter Halloran, the Jesuit scholastic who became the Exorcist assistant, was ordained in the Society of Jesus in 1954.
Okay.
He would later teach history and religion at various high schools and universities for years. After that, he would serve as a chaplain for the U.S. Army paratrooper unit, a U.S. Army paratrooper unit in the Vietnam War. He was actually awarded 2 Bronze Stars for his service over there.
Wow. He
once told a reporter when they were talking about the Robbie Mannheim exorcist case, he told the reporter that he saw more evil in Vietnam than he ever did during any of those exorcisms.
Sure. Yeah.
That's kind of like sort of the underlying thread of this is most of the men involved in this, they had seen war. One of them helped build the A-bomb. I mean, I just find it kind of interesting that the backdrop of all of their lives was the horrors of the 20th century. So it was sort of like
they saw hell in different dimensions.
Exactly. So it's like, we can handle this. Right. Although the physicist was less well prepared.
Right. Yeah.
Once asked to go on the record saying whether he thought the boy was really possessed, Halloran said, quote, "No, I can't go on the record. I never made an absolute statement about the thing because I didn't feel I was qualified." End quote.
Okay.
In the late 1980s, Halloran was named assistant director of alumni relations at Creighton University. He died in 2005, the last surviving member of the Exorcism team.
Wow.
So he was really I would say in those last few years of his life, he was on podcasts or radio shows, actually, St. Louis radio shows. I never thought he was seeking sensationalism. It never seemed.
But he was willing to talk about it.
He was willing to talk about it if people called him. I think he was always respectful about it. I think he was one of the funny things about one of the journalists who interviewed him about it, the journalist was later quoted saying, Father Halloran was always a real Jesuit about it. He couldn't say, he was always inquiring, and he was really restless in his own struggling to articulate what he had actually experienced, which I appreciated.
But, something was going on.
Yeah.
So you got to show care and concern to that family and that boy, and whether you have a little bit of doubt of whether it was actually possession or not, you've got to have that care for the child.
That was what I thought was so cool about these 3 men is, as scary as this was and exhausting, and it was entirely outside their realm.
Right.
what you exactly said, care and concern for that family. Somebody came and asked them for help, and they said, we don't know exactly what we're doing, but we're going to try to do the best job we absolutely can. And, whatever was going on, whether it was demonic possession or mental illness, they helped that family. I mean, unquestionably, they helped them get through this really horrible time. So, yeah, it was very, very Jesuit.
I would say it's not unlike our Jesuits today.
No, not at all.
If they're called upon to help, they're going to do everything they can to help somebody out.
I would absolutely agree with that. That one thing too, this story really made me realize is just how small the Jesuit community really is.
Right.
In America, particularly, at least within, especially within higher ed.
Right.
It's almost inevitable that there would be a Creighton connection to a group of Jesuits at St. Louis University.
Right. Yeah.
Because I think we, at least at the time, shared the same province.
Right.
Jesuits move around a lot. So I suppose it's not too surprising, but it's even 100 years of history.
So did the boy ever talk about it? And was he ever on record talking about it? And he talked about the service the Jesuits gave to him?
He did.
Okay.
Yeah. So
what was his thoughts?
This is our grand finale.
All right, good.
This is among my favorite details of this.
Okay.
So what happened to Robbie Mannheim?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Yep.
His true identity was later revealed in 2021, about a year after his death at the age of 86. So I think it was a podcast that revealed it. Then the New York Post revealed it. Then the Guardian revealed it. So it kind of got.
So not until 2021.
Yeah, at the very least, they waited until he was dead to reveal it. There may have been some people who knew. I mean, I think some people in the church probably it got passed down. Okay. I'm not going to reveal his full name, but you can find it online for
sure. Yeah.
If you want. I can't say his first name was Ron.
Okay.
Not Robbie or Roland, but Ron. So that was his alias.
Okay.
Ron is his real name. Ron had no known recurrence of the phenomena that marked those months in 1949. Wow. He went on to live a normal life. In fact, it was kind of an extraordinary life. He became a NASA engineer. He patented the space shuttle panels that were capable of withstanding extreme heat, his work making possible the Apollo space missions of the 1960s that led to the moon landing.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
That is so great.
Who would have known? I confirmed this because I read it. I was like, that can't be.
Yeah.
I went and found the patent. His name's on it. Yeah. I mean, it's him and another guy. They created this and it's in the NASA archives.
Is that right?
Yeah. It's true.
Wow.
He did this. There are so many other claims about him though.
Yeah.
And I don't know. There were claims that he lived in Omaha for a while too.
Really?
Yeah. I didn't confirm those. It was in the St. Louis Dispatch.
Okay.
It was what some of the Jesuits believed without revealing his name at the time. There was other reports that he named his first child Michael, who he said had saved him.
Yep.
Shortly after Ron's death, the New York Post interviewed his former companion.
Okay.
They didn't name her because she didn't want to be named. She said Ron spent his entire life terrified that his NASA colleagues would find out that he was the Exorcist boy.
Oh.
Quote from his companion in the New York Post. On Halloween, we always left the house because Ron figured someone would come to the residence and know where he lived and never leave him in peace. End quote. Ron's companion also revealed that Ron himself didn't believe he was demonically possessed.
Is that right?
Yeah. This is a quote from her again. He said he wasn't possessed, that it was all concocted. He said, I was just a bad boy.
No kidding.
Said that. In the same New York Post story, the woman said that shortly before Ron died, a Catholic priest showed up on their doorstep to perform last rites. She was baffled. So was he. No one had called a priest. No one had said that he was dying to the Catholic.
Oh my gosh, I've got tingling now. Wow.
She said to New York Post, I have no idea how the Father knew to come, but he got Ron to heaven. Ron's in heaven and he's with God now.
Oh my gosh, what a great ending.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. Yeah, she claimed, she was like, yeah, I don't know.
Some priest just showed up on their doorstep.
Some priest. I don't know if he was a Jesuit, but somebody from the church, I guess they were keeping tabs on him.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. There's something about him working for NASA that I thought was so cool.
So Micah, just tell me a little bit about the research you had to do to get all this together, because I think that's kind of amazing, the work you put into this to find all this information.
It just started going through some Creighton archives. Actually, my first thread into it was William Bodern's brother, Thomas Bodern, because he was a pretty interesting guy, and I was reading some details about him. Found out his brother was also a Jesuit. Oh, he was the exorcist of the Exorcist. Oh, wow. I'll look into the exorcism a little bit more. Oh, these other guys. This guy was a professor at Creighton. Oh, man, this guy worked for alumni relations. So, you just keep going. And then, eventually I just started with Google. I found some articles. I found some primary sources, found the book, Possessed. There's a documentary about The Exorcist I watched that was a little bit about how William Peter Blatty came upon the idea. So I just kind of keep going. I got a little fixated on this just because I like horror movies. And
right.
But so
is this your favorite horror movie or no?
I wouldn't say it's my favorite. No,
okay.
I think it is, except for maybe Halloween and Psycho. I think it's the most important and influential horror movie. Maybe the most. Right,
because other movies mimic this or took pieces of this in their portrayals.
And in terms of its, as a cultural sensation, I think it's pretty unmatched as a horror movie, certainly.
Right.
But yeah, no, my favorite horror movie is probably The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982.
Oh, really?
I don't know if you've ever seen
That's another one I'll have to watch.
It's gross.
Okay.
It's an alien. It's very gross. Yeah.
Well, what I love about your stories, all the connections, connecting all the dots here. And again, it just seems very Jesuit of what they did. And whether you believe it or not, they went out and tried to help somebody. And help them through a tough time and help the family.
Yeah.
And, along the way now, part of history.
I don't want this to seem like this was at all a mockery of this event or anything. I don't know what happened. I mean, nobody does because everybody who was there is dead.
Right.
And, the 3 or 4 most important people involved in it didn't even agree on it. So.
Right. They were trying to do what was right.
Yeah.
And whether you believe it or not, they had to help. They had to help them. I
can say one thing too. SLU has owned this story. They have panel discussions every once in a while about it. The students have like some Halloween traditions I read about.
Okay.
It's part of their lore. So,
okay.
I do want to say I'm stealing this story for Creighton briefly, but this story belongs to St. Louis University.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's our fellow Jesuit university.
Yeah.
Just a really fascinating piece again.
Yeah.
Of Weird Creighton history. Great stuff.
All right. Well, thanks, Rick. Sorry this episode ran a little long, but there's just a lot to get in. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, until next time, great stories.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
Bye.